Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, you're in for a treat today. What if the Soviets had beaten the USA to the moon? Have you ever imagined what would happen if one alternate moment in 1969 creates a timeline where the impossible becomes inevitable? The series For All Mankind lets us reimagine the space race and everything that follows if it actually happened. With Season 5 coming soon, this is the perfect time to review the series. Before we begin, hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon so you never miss an upload. With 4 seasons to review, make sure you buckle up. We're now launching! In 1969, the Soviets shock the world by landing on the moon first, leaving NASA and the USA reeling. US astronauts vent their frustration at their regular bar called The Outpost. A reporter appears in their midst, hoping for a statement. When astronaut Ed Baldwin mentions that NASA has lost its nerve after the Apollo-1 tragedy, his comments leak to the press, putting his career in jeopardy. Meanwhile, young Aleida Rosales watches history unfold from Mexico. Soon, she loses her mother and heads north with her father. Returning to NASA, despite the setback of losing, Apollo 11 stays on schedule. When it finally launches, hope returns. However, it easily collapses again when the mission control loses contact during landing. Hours later, Neil Armstrong's voice crackles through, reporting that it is still there and that they've landed. After leaving the moon, Apollo 11 safely returns home, but the space race doesn't end there. Politicians push for a military presence on the moon. When NASA's chief rocket engineer, Wernher von Braun, resists, it triggers congressional hearings. Instead of testifying against von Braun, Ed Baldwin takes responsibility for Apollo 10, claiming the loss of the first moon landing chance was his fault. Despite this, von Braun's dark past was used to remove him from NASA. Though her mentor, von Braun, suffers, Margo Madison breaks barriers as the first woman in mission control. Meanwhile, astronaut Gordo's wife, Tracy, discovers he's having an affair. After discussing it with Ed's wife, Karen, Tracy chose to feign ignorance. As for Ed, Chief Astronaut Deke Slayton gives him back his job for Apollo 15. Just as Apollo 12 launches, the Soviets shock the world again by landing the first woman on the moon. Nixon forces NASA to do the same. So, Deke launches a rushed female astronaut program, pulling in standouts like Molly Cobb, Patty Doyle, and Danielle Poole. Due to political pressure, Gordo's wife, Tracy, a former pilot, also joins. Training is brutal, cuts are public, and favoritism is also apparent. Molly proves herself repeatedly, while Tracy struggles with confidence and resentment over being treated as a publicity stunt. During their desert survival training, Tracy breaks protocol to save an injured colleague. Later, Deke tells her she may not belong, but she refuses to quit. As training narrows to 5 candidates, an incident during a simulator run makes Patty lose her life. Gordon drives fast to the scene, and relief washes over him when Tracy appears safe. After Patty's death, the female astronaut program faces pressure to shut down, but Deke defies orders and publicly certifies Danny, Ellen, Molly, and Tracy as astronauts. Politics collide with progress as Molly is assigned to Apollo 15, replacing Gordo and straining friendships and marriages. Ed Baldwin struggles to trust Molly, while Molly is angry for being treated like a symbol instead of a pilot. However, training exposes real gaps and clashing egos, but Margo gives her a wake-up call, reminding Molly that she's now an astronaut. Molly picks herself up, proving herself suitable for her position. Soon, Apollo 15 launches, carrying the first American woman toward the moon. As Apollo 15 reaches lunar orbit, data from mission control suggests there's ice near the dangerous Shackleton crater. Ed pushes to change the landing site, and the crew votes to take the risk. They land successfully on the moon's surface and begin their mission. Later, defying orders again, Molly descends into the dangerous crater herself. Oxygen slowly drops, giving her limited time to investigate. They didn't find anything substantial until the rope reached its maximum length. Looking around, she finally finds ice. Back on Earth, fear initially enveloped the families. It soon turns to pride and relief when the mission becomes a success and Apollo 15 lifts off safely. 2 years later, NASA successfully lands Jamestown, the first permanent moon base. Years pass, and now Apollo 23 prepares to launch, while Jamestown's crew, which includes Ed, Gordo, and Danny, watches from the moon. However, Apollo 23 explodes on the pad, ending the lives of 12 people. With launches grounded, Jamestown survives on unmanned resupply. However, the FBI suspects sabotage and probes the personal lives of everyone in NASA. Meanwhile, Margo is sent to retrieve her mentor's report on the matter, only to uncover the truth that political deal-making led to faulty hardware and those deaths. Just when she passes it, the report is buried. But Margo refuses to stay small and demands to become a flight director in exchange for her her silence. Later, Margo meets young and bright Aleida Rosales, the daughter of the janitor, Octavio, and decides to teach her. On the moon, Gordo spots strange lights in the distance during his walk. As Apollo-24 gets delayed again, Ed, Gordo, and Danny are now stranded. They settle into isolation, with work and TV show reruns. Gordo starts fixating on missing ants, strange signals, and reenacting a TV show. Though he slips further, Ed becomes stricter. With the Soviets nearby, it is inevitable that they are tasked to surveil them. However, Gordo finally loses it, and Ed confronts the truth that Gordo needs to return home immediately. Knowing how Gordo may lose everything if it's revealed, Danny fakes an injury to force a medical evacuation for both her and Gordo. Unable to leave the base unmanned, they leave Ed alone on the moon. Back home, Karen's discipline turns violent because of their son, Shane's actions. Despite receiving a scolding, Shane sneaks out while Karen is out and an accident occurs. Upon receiving the news, Karen waits in the hospital as doctors fight to save Shane. However, the hit and run leaves him with severe brain damage. On the moon, Ed works alone, unaware of what's happening to his family. Back on Earth, Apollo-24 prepares for launch amid interviews, FBI scrutiny, and the pressure on Ellen, who just recently married her fake boyfriend to hide that they're gay. Gordo struggles to readjust, finally admitting to his wife that he's seeing a psychiatrist. Later, Tracy drops everything to stand by Karen upon learning what happened. When doctors confirm Shane is brain dead, Karen refuses to tell Ed, believing there's still hope. Mission Control backs her decision, forcing everyone else to keep quiet about it. However, the truth soon reaches Ed through a Soviet message offering condolences. Furious, he destroys the Soviet surveillance camera on their mine. When hope's truly lost, Karen finally tells him, Ed shuts down completely as grief consumes them both. Soon, Apollo-24 launches to finally bring Ed home, but a failed ignition leaves the crew stranded in orbit. As Karen prepares for Shane's funeral, grief isolates her, pushing her toward reckless choices. Meanwhile, Aleida's father discovers Aleida's acceptance letter into the Kennedy Math and Science program, but Aleida says she's not sure about attending. They argue, and Octavio grounds her. Later, Octavio gets accused and arrested for espionage. In space, the Apollo-24 rescue mission turns catastrophic. An explosion makes them lose astronaut Harry, while Molly drifts off, with nothing tethering her to safety. Unwilling to give up, Gordo guides Tracy through a maneuver that saves Molly's life. In the moon's mining area, Ed encounters a cosmonaut who threatens his way out. Later, the same cosmonaut needs help, but Ed traps and knocks the other unconscious by denying him oxygen. Back on Earth, Octavio is deported, and Aleida loses everything and runs. Meanwhile, Karen starts to pick herself up. As Apollo-24 drifts, Ellen rescues a wounded Deke after Harry is lost in space. With cut-off communications, Ellen takes command, manually maneuvering back to the moon. On Mission Control, Margo enforces a last-ditch plan that involves Ed aiding with refueling using old hardware. On the moon, Ed holds cosmonaut Mikhail captive, but desperation to save Apollo-24 in time forces trust. He lets Mikhail go as he goes off to save the others. The plan almost fails with how unstable Apollo-24 is, but Ellen tells Ed to throw the fuel and she'll catch it. Ellen misses it and makes a breathtaking leap in space. She completes the mission, but Deke dies of his injury. Soon, Ellen relieves Ed of his duties. Ed finally comes home while Ellen stays behind, alone on the moon. The first season ends with the US launching a rocket from the depths of the seas by 1983. Season 2 opens in 1983 with Ellen preparing to leave Jamestown colony, savoring one last moment as commander of a more developed lunar space station. Meanwhile, Margo has become more social, trading favors to protect her programs while the next generation space shuttle, Pathfinder, stirs political tension. Ed now leads as the chief astronaut, while Karen focuses on running the outpost with their adopted daughter, Kelly. As for the Stevens, Gordo drifts through public appearances, while Tracy is now married to entrepreneur Sam Cleveland. In space, during Skylab's inspection, they notice a massive solar flare eruption at the sun's surface. Within minutes, it knocks out satellites and communication. Prepared for any international attacks, the US military goes DEFCON 3. On the moon, Jamestown scrambles for shelter from the radiation. While most astronauts make it to the base, Molly and astronaut Wubbo are stranded far away. Unfortunately, Wubbo's rover crashes, and Molly makes a dangerous choice. She runs into the radiation storm, risking her own life to save him. The solar storm reshapes everything. Due to radiation exposure, Ellen forces Molly to return to Earth despite her protests. Soon, Ellen, Molly, and Wubbo return to Earth. Politics creep deeper into space as NASA is pushed toward a symbolic handshake mission between astronaut and cosmonaut. In the outpost, Ed, Gordo, and Danny meet up. With the loss of her husband, Danny tells Ed and Gordo that she wants to return to the moon. Meanwhile, Tracy leans into celebrity life, while Gordo tries to stay afloat through drinking and public appearances. When their son, Danny, returns from the Naval Academy at Annapolis, the family gets together. Later, Wubbo decides to leave the program, while Molly hides worsening symptoms, refusing to slow down. Ed then shocks everyone by assigning Danny and Gordo back to the moon together. On the moon, NASA discovers the Soviets have seized their newly claimed lithium site. It is then that they realize an ugly truth that their base has been bugged for years. Washington then authorizes taking the site back, even if it means militarizing the moon. Margo resists, but Ed insists it's necessary. Meanwhile, Margo tracks down Aleida, who's about to be deported. Margo offers her a job, which Aleida hesitatingly accepts. At work, Tracy demands that Gordo's lunar mission be moved back so that their time on the moon won't collide, but Ed won't give in. At home, Kelly shocks her parents by choosing the Naval Academy as her first choice for college. This triggers Ed's grief over Shane and his fear of losing another child. The family stays strong after their discussion. The next morning, Karen pushes Ed to admit that he still wants to return to space. Facing this truth, he assigns himself commander of Pathfinder and gives the chief astronaut position to Molly. Later, Danny demands a command worthy of her sacrifice. Ed surprises NASA by backing her to lead the joint US-Soviet mission, Handshake in Space, sending a powerful message despite political resistance. Meanwhile, Ellen discusses repositioning NASA's future toward Mars with NASA Administrator Tom Paine. As training ramps up, Gordo struggles with panic, but Ed pushes him to steel himself. During a flight exercise, Ed's jet malfunctions, forcing him to eject into the ocean. Back home, Ed's near-death scares Karen. Ed senses the distance growing, but can't reach her. Tracy finally lands on the moon, smiling for the cameras, then immediately learns living there isn't as glorious as it all seems. Jamestown feels cramped, loud, and lonely. Soon, the sleepless nights, isolation, and pressure weigh down on her. On Earth, Gordo begins a brutal self-training, trying to burn away the man he used to be before returning to space. At NASA, Aleida officially assumes the role of junior engineer. On the moon, Tracy makes a dangerous mistake, loses her media privileges, and finally admits the truth at Deke's grave that even though she made it to the moon, she still feels empty. The Apollo-Soyuz mission starts with smiles, handshakes, and immediate tension as the Soviets arrive in the US. The Soviets push back on names, protocols, and control, turning cooperation into a quiet power struggle. Meanwhile, Gordo confronts Tracy's new life, and Kelly questions who she really is as she writes her application letter for the Naval Academy. On the moon, new astronauts who came from the Marines have just arrived, and weapons training begins as Tracy keeps things light, even though pressure is building. Back on Earth, Margo and Soviet engineer Sergei risk everything with an off-the-books meeting, bonding over shared fears and engineering instincts, and sketching out a universal docking solution. Aleida sees them together and works with them to refine it. They present this the next day, and communication between the two countries becomes better. Meanwhile, Ellen's life flips overnight when her father's heart attack keeps her grounded and saves her from a flight the Soviets shoot down. However, this ends NASA Administrator Tom's life, who was subbing for her. Suddenly, Ellen is acting as NASA Administrator, juggling grief, Cold War fallout, and the White House's demands for strength. Elsewhere, the American astronauts fail to receive a warm welcome as they arrive at Star City in the Soviet Union, and are instead held hostage. As the Apollo-Soyuz mission begins collapsing, Margo leans on Sergei to protect the astronauts, slipping him a warning about a deadly flaw in their Buran shuttle. Soon, Danny and the rest are released. Meanwhile, Karen sells the outpost and makes a reckless choice of sleeping with Danny, which immediately haunts her. On the moon, Tracy volunteers to fly the others to retake their lithium mine. With weapons drawn, the cosmonauts flee, proving them successful. The retaken lunar mine soon earns Ellen praise and an offer to become a permanent NASA administrator. Meanwhile, Molly learns radiation cost her more than she admitted, facing eventual blindness. At NASA, Margo reunites with Sergei to work on Apollo-Soyuz and push the handshake forward. Soon, Gordo launches back to the moon and finds Jamestown transformed. There, Gordo and Tracy reconnect, and Gordo admits his intention to get her back. At 357 Bravo, astronauts discover cosmonauts nearby, and it ends with astronauts shooting at them when they thought the Soviets were reaching for weapons. However, they soon learn that the cosmonauts were only reaching for their translation card. The moon standoff explodes into a political nightmare. The injured cosmonaut is treated at Jamestown as others realize the shooting was a tragic misunderstanding, not an attack. The Soviets respond with threats, launching the armed Buran shuttle and blocking the moon. With an unknown threat, Pathfinder is rushed forward, and Ed briefs his crew on a mission that may turn hostile, unsure if nuclear weapons are even involved. At home, Ed and Karen finally confront the truth about her affair, and the fallout follows him as he heads into space. On the moon, the Soviets demand custody of their wounded, while the injured cosmonaut secretly asks for asylum. However, the remaining cosmonauts retaliate. Heading to Jamestown, they open fire, shattering the base and finishing one of the astronauts. With Jamestown breached and partially depressurized, pressurized, the armed cosmonauts take a hostage, demanding the return of their cosmonauts. As it happens, Gordo and Tracy are isolated elsewhere, realizing the base is lost unless someone acts. On Earth, the military goes to DEFCON 2, while Pathfinder and Buran face one another in lunar orbit. On the Moon, a damaged reactor threatens a meltdown that could wipe out Jamestown forever. With no suits available, Gordo and Tracy attempt the impossible, stepping outside to reroute the reactor and save everyone inside. At the same time, Danny defies orders and docks Apollo with Soyuz, creating a moment of hope amid the chaos. Meanwhile, Ed leads Pathfinder, but they just lost communications with Mission Control. As the commander, Ed chooses to shoot their own unmanned vessel to avoid a fight with the Soviets' Buran. War is narrowly avoided, Jamestown survives, and peace returns. But Gordo and Tracy do not. Their sacrifice, along with the success of the Apollo-Soyuz mission, and Ed's choice, end the crisis, changing humanity's future forever. The second season then ends with a man taking his first step on Mars. Congrats on making it halfway through the series. If you are enjoying it so far, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. Thanks for tuning in, and we're now blasting off to the third season. In Season 3, NASA and the Soviet Union's National Space Program, Roscosmos, race toward Mars, with Margo juggling failed engine tests, leadership decisions, and secret calls with Sergei. Now divorced, Karen opens Polaris with Sam Cleveland. As the luxury orbital hotel's soft launch, they host Danny and Amber Stevens' wedding. Mid-reception, debris from a North Korean rocket damages Polaris, forcing a thruster to lock on. This incident steadily raises the gravity, and if it continues, Polaris will fall apart. During a spacewalk to stabilize the thrusters, technicians die and systems begin failing. Karen orders an evacuation, but escape routes fail and gravity climbs past survivable limits. With no one else able to move, Danny makes a desperate spacewalk, manually shutting down the thruster just as Polaris nearly tears itself apart. He makes it in time, saving everyone. Meanwhile, Ellen, now a senator, locks in a conservative running mate to secure her presidential run. In the fallout from Polaris, Karen sells the station to Helios Aerospace, run by bold newcomer Dev Aisa. At NASA, Molly names Ed as Mars commander, with Danny Poole as backup. Upon hearing the news, Margo fires Molly and hands the mission to Danny instead. Ed lashes out and burns bridges. Karen steps in to help Ed, convincing Dev to make him Helios's Mars commander and taking a job there herself. Then Helios announces to everyone that they'll refit Polaris as Phoenix and beat NASA to Mars. As the Mars race accelerates, Kelly, now a biologist, returns from Antarctica and secures a seat on Danny's NASA crew. Meanwhile, Danny Stevens gets arrested for breaking into his old home and is pulled from the mission, only for Ed to recruit him to Helios. Karen tries to poach Aleida for Helios, but Aleida stays loyal, while flight director Bill Strausser jumps ship to join Helios. Abroad, Margo and Sergei cross an emotional line just as the KGB corners her, threatening Sergei's life to extract nuclear engine secrets. 2 years later, in 1992, Helios's Phoenix, NASA's Sojourner 1, and the Soviets' Mars 94 all launch for Mars. Aleida is now the flight director, and Ellen is now the president of the US. All three ships race toward Mars, with Phoenix leading. That is until Sojourner deploys solar sails and surges ahead. Furious, Dev demands that Helios reclaim first place at any cost. As Ellen visits NASA, the Soviets attempt a reckless burn to catch up, triggering a nuclear meltdown aboard Mars 94. Ed and Danny push for a rescue, but Dev locks Phoenix out of its own controls, forcing Sojourner to save the cosmonauts. During the dangerous rendezvous, a fuel tank ruptures and slams Mars 94 toward Sojourner. In the chaos, 2 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut lose their lives. The crews of Sojourner and Mars 94 honor their fallen with a joint burial in space. On Earth, Margo trades limited mission resources to free Sergei from KGB custody and bring him to Houston, while Aleida realizes the Soviet engines are stolen NASA designs. On Phoenix, Ed regains control from Dev, pushing Karen to quit Helios for good. As the ships reach Mars, a brutal dust storm complicates everything. Ed aborts Phoenix's landing, reliving an old regret, while Danny commits to the descent. Sojourner lands safely. On Mars's surface, Danny and Soviet Commander Kuznetsov physically scramble, landing together and sharing history's first step on the Red Planet. The Sojourner crew uneasily shares their resources with Mars 94, with Danny calling the place Happy Valley. Helios soon drops on Mars and runs its own base nearby. With Sojourner damaged, everyone plans to return to Earth aboard Phoenix. In one Mars task, Danny injures himself during drilling and slips into painkiller abuse. Meanwhile, astronaut Will Tyler comes out as gay during a broadcast, sparking tension on Mars and backlash on Earth. This prompts Ellen to issue a new executive order for military protections that prevents investigating the gender of soldiers, which means they don't have to come out and get dismissed. On Mars, Kelly and one of the cosmonauts, Alexei Polotov, grow closer, deepening their secret relationship. On Earth, Karen returns to Helios as COO, as Dev cuts a deal with the Soviets to drill for newly discovered water. Sergei secretly warns Margo about the find, and when those on Sojourner learn this, an argument on Mars is unavoidable. With the New Deal, the Soviets move into Helios, and Sergei is sent back to his country. Meanwhile, Aleida begins connecting the dots to figure out who betrayed them. In Congress, Ellen's husband, Larry, lies under oath about sleeping with an aide. When Ellen learns of it, she also discovers the truth about how her ex-girlfriend, Pam, chose to disappear to force Ellen to reconsider her career. Elsewhere, the extremist friends of Gordo and Tracy's son, Jimmy, steal Gordo and Tracy's statue. On Mars, Helios pushes ahead with drilling for water despite Kelly's warnings about possible life. Meanwhile, Danny's dependence on meds escalates, and Ed pulls him from the mission. Now tasked with communications from the base, Danny loses focus. The noise overwhelms him, making him cut communications mid-drill. Because of his actions, the operation explodes, injuring Ed. Worse, when Danny and a colleague save them, the previous explosion triggers a massive landslide that threatens the entire Mars Helios base. After the landslide, Happy Valley tries to contact them as Alexei digs himself out and finds only one astronaut survivor. On Earth, NASA, Helios, and Roscosmos unite and put forward a risky rescue. During the planning, Dev reveals his past scars to Margo. Meanwhile, Karen comforts anxious families and visits the Stevens. She comforts Danny's wife, Amber, while Jimmy reveals to Karen that he knew about her affair with his brother. Elsewhere, Ellen faces political fallout and risks visiting Pam, who told her she left her in hopes of a better future for people like them. On Mars, Alexei and Kelly work together to locate Ed and Danny, but Alexei collapses from head trauma and requires surgery. Ed and Danny, trapped together, confront old guilt and resentment over Shane's death before a risky rescue mission finally reaches them. In the end, they both survive, but Alexei and some others don't. 5 months later, everyone just wants off Mars. The combined crews race to repair the MSAM, the vehicle that can bring them back to Helios's Phoenix. But broken docking electronics force Danny and Kuznetsov to drive across the planet to salvage parts from an old North Korean probe. On Earth, Aleida and Bill conclude that Margo leaked engine designs to the Soviets, and Bill secretly alerts the FBI. Meanwhile, Helios pushes Dev out, installs Karen as CEO, and prepares to sell Phoenix to NASA. As political pressure mounts, Ellen comes out publicly to stop threats on Larry, execute orders that allow gay men and women to serve in the military, and grant astronaut Will Tyler a Presidential Medal of Freedom. On Mars, Kelly is pregnant, and she collapses. Elsewhere, Danny and Kuznetsov encounter a hidden, armed North Korean Ujonaut. In a flashback, the North Korean Ujonaut Lee Jung-gil arrives on Mars, but gets stranded alone for months. At present, he now confronts Danny and Kuznetsov at gunpoint. While held up, they realize that it is actually the North Koreans who got there first on Mars. When Danny tries to communicate, Kuznetsov disarms Lee, and they bring him back to their base. With now limited resources, Kelly and her baby's life is at risk because of preeclampsia. The crew sacrifices their own return so she can reach Phoenix and give birth safely. To do this, Ed pilots her up to the highest point they can get, and she launches herself to reach Phoenix. Ed then dangerously descends back to Mars, but he ultimately gets back. On Earth, Karen replaces Dev at Helios, and Margo pushes with the rescue despite having the FBI's investigations on her. However, disaster strikes when Jimmy's extremist allies bomb JSC, ending the lives of Karen and Molly. In the aftermath, those on Mars will have to wait before they can return to Earth. However, they isolate Danny Stevens as punishment for his previous negligent actions. On Earth, Ellen, who refused to resign despite political pressure, reconnects with Pam. Sergei and his family manage to defect, but Margo, who disappeared during the explosion, later reappears in 2003 in a different place. Season 4 begins on Mars in the year 2003. Despite previous tragedy, Happy Valley thrives under the Mars 7 Alliance, formed by the USA, Soviet Union, North Korea, Japan, India, the European Space Agency, and the Coalition of Communist Countries for spaceflight. As crews attempt to tow an asteroid, the mission turns fatal when Kuznetsov sacrifices himself after a cable failure. The loss rattles everyone, especially Ed, who is forced to let him go. On Earth, Danny is asked to return as Happy Valley's commander, while Aleida's trauma of the explosion haunts her. In the Soviet Union, Margo now lives under a different name, but due to a mundane life, she wants to work again. At Helios, Miles Dale lies his way in and accepts a risky Mars posting as a space worker. Soon, the new crew settles into Happy Valley. However, not everything is happy because Miles learns his Mars paycheck is mostly smoke and mirrors, and the communications for them in the lower levels are faulty. Meanwhile, Danny reunites with Ed, honors Kuznetsov, and quickly sees the growing class divide between upper and lower levels of the base. Danny then forces a satellite repair to patch up the problem. On Earth, Aleida leaves NASA, briefly returns, then quits again. She later bonds with Kelly over drinks and shared frustration. Knowing that Kelly's losing her job, Aleida suggests working together to bring to light Kelly's project to search for life on Mars. In the Soviet Union, protests erupt and the streets turn violent. Margo gets caught in the middle of it and gets arrested. On Mars, Miles finds a way to make money by helping his colleague Ilya run an unsavory operation, using his access to move goods. In the process, he catches Lee Jung-gil's attention, who wants help in bringing his wife to him. Meanwhile, Ed hides worsening hand tremors, confiding in cosmonaut Svetlana. On Earth, Kelly and Aleida's Seeker project is rejected until Dev re-enters. He initially rejects them, but as if a wake-up call, he finally moves by launching a hostile takeover of Helios and reclaims control. Elsewhere, Margo survives interrogation and is offered a new job at Roscosmos by Irina Morozova under a new regime. At Happy Valley, a political argument between Svetlana and a Russian Helios worker turns violent, leaving the Helios worker injured and Svetlana facing recall to a hostile Soviet trial. Ed refuses to hand her over, triggering a treaty crisis that fractures the Mars 7 alliance. On Earth, Irina maneuvers Roscosmos power, while Margo uncovers the real cause of the recent Mars disaster, implicating the Soviets' lack of quality control. Meanwhile, Helios workers grow resentful at what happened to their colleague, and Miles secretly schemes to sell Martian rocks, nearly dying in the process. It is thanks to Sam Massey that he gets saved. Soon, a fragile compromise sends Svetlana to trial in India. Ed's trust in Donnie shatters, especially when she points out Ed's habit of protecting those under his care against his better judgment. Later, a massive iridium-rich asteroid, which they call Goldilocks, is discovered, igniting a global scramble that could reshape power on Earth and Mars. Danny leads tense planning, clashing with Ed over crew choices and mission control as his health raises alarms. On Earth, Dev impulsively decides to go to Mars, leaving Aleida in charge of Helios and pushing Kelly to come with him. Hesitant to leave her son, Alex, Kelly decides to take him with her after getting clearance from his doctors. Meanwhile, US President Gore takes credit for finding the asteroid, angering the Soviets. On Mars, a flashback reveals how Danny Stevens died isolated, and at present, Danny carries that guilt with her ever since. Soon, Danny discovers Ed's hand tremors and grounds him, shattering their partnership. On Earth, world leaders gather in Leningrad to decide Goldilocks' fate, with Aleida pitching a trillion-dollar gamble. Behind the scenes, Margo secretly feeds Irina solutions, while the current NASA director pushes the idea of redirecting the asteroid closer to Earth for faster returns on their investment. On Mars, Ed loses purpose and drifts into Ilya's bar. After uncovering the Helios cuts, he supports the Helios workers' discussion of unionizing and going on strike. Meanwhile, Ilya pulls Miles out of his operation. Miles retaliates by using Lee Jung-gil's anger over Ilya's failure to locate his wife and seize control of the entire bar in operation. Back in Leningrad, Mars 7 decides to pull Goldilocks into Earth's orbit. To make it possible, Margo makes a bold choice. She reveals herself to Aleida and the world, ending her life in hiding and claiming leadership of the asteroid mission. Soon, Margo prepares to return to the US despite public dismay. On Mars, a week-long strike of Helios workers grips Happy Valley. Danny struggles to keep the mission alive while Mars 7 engineers secretly restart the cryo plant, triggering a deadly explosion that ends one life and injures several. Meanwhile, Dev, Kelly, and Alex arrive on Mars. Helios CEO Dev ends the strike by literally drawing a line. If they cross, he's offering them cash. Most workers cross the line, but Ed and some others don't, proving that some can't be bought. Later, Dev approaches Ed with a proposition. Since they both want to stay on Mars, Dev asks Ed to help him steal an asteroid. As Goldilocks' plans move forward, past lives collide with present schemes. Sergei resurfaces in the US, shaken by Margo's return, and seeks out Aleida to reveal the truth behind Margo's defection. On Mars, Dev and Ed push a secret plot to steal the asteroid, recruiting Sam and reviving Miles's network. However, they cross a line by getting Alex's help in retrieving critical hardware. On Earth, Margo struggles with her public role and private guilt. Through Aleida, she reconnects with Sergei and learns that Irina was Sergei's handler, and she's responsible for destroying their lives. Soon, the day to redirect Goldilocks arrives. Aboard the Ranger space shuttle, Sam infiltrates the crew with a mission to sabotage the discriminator box and replace it with their own, allowing Ed's team to take control of Ranger. As Goldilocks nears Mars, Sam does her job. Meanwhile, Kelly grows suspicious of Dev and Ed, while Miles helps them get surveillance access through Lee Jung-gil. But it is soon discovered by Lee's superior. Mars 7 learns of the sabotage plan due to stolen communications gear. As Danny deploys CIA and KGB operatives, Miles gets arrested. Meanwhile, Lee deals with his superior when their location of operations on a close closed-off floor is discovered. Back on Earth, Aleida, Margo, and Sergei figure out solutions to shorten the asteroid timeline. In a private moment, Sergei suggests escaping with Margo to Brazil. Later, Margo dreams of Brazil, but it is at that moment that Sergei is assassinated elsewhere. Outside of Mars, the Ranger prepares for the final burn to change the Goldilocks orbit. However, literal buried secrets resurface. The weapon that Lee initially brought to Mars was found and brought to base. Meanwhile, Miles finally breaks under pressure, and Danny's team discovers the stolen tech is used for Dev and Ed's team of Ghost Ops. Ed and the others manage to escape and hide in the North Korean sector. Almost doomed, Ed's team gambles everything on a last-second override that rests on Sam. Using the North Korean comms, Sam receives their instruction and risks her life to force a burn that'll let Goldilocks orbit Mars instead. On Earth, Margo learns of Sergei's death and confronts Irina. Knowing that the current Goldilocks plan will close the Mars mission, Aleida helps Margo ensure that the asteroid stays on Mars. Though successful, they are discovered. To protect Aleida, Margo claims it was all her. This prompts Irina to revoke Margo's diplomatic protection, and Margo immediately gets arrested. On Mars, after Ed's team successfully pulls Goldilocks into their orbit, chaos erupts at Happy Valley between the Mars 7 crew and Helios workers. In an attempt to stop the riot, Danny is critically wounded. Once things settle, she safely makes it back to Earth. At the end of Season 4, Goldilocks remains in Mars orbit, and Lee reunites with his wife, turning the Red Planet into a new home for many. And that's for all mankind. That single twist reshaped everything. The space race intensified into a full-scale competition, which pushed humanity to Mars decades early and transformed the Cold War into a battle fought among the stars. So what do you think? If the Soviets had actually beaten the USA to the moon, do you think we'd be on Mars by now? Or is the show way too optimistic? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like on this video, and if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. More epic series coming up, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.